Hey everybody, welcome back to Popping Culture. Today I want to talk about pop music and standardization, a very interesting, cool critique from Adorno. Maybe you'll agree with it, maybe you won't, but it's definitely something you want to better understand. So let's get to it. So yeah, this week, like probably almost every other week, will be easier than Foucault, but it won't be super easy that, you automatically get it. And again, that's what school should be about. That's what especially liberal arts college should be about. If you understood everything that was presented to you immediately, you would be totally wasting your money, right? So hopefully these readings challenge you again. You don't need to understand them all, especially in the sense that you want to define everything and then regurgitate it on an exam, which you don't have. Instead, you want to be thinking, how do these things apply to my life, to other people, and pop culture, of course, but also how can I make sense of it? How can I better understand what's going on in the world? That's the point of this. And today I want to do that through pop music, which sort of ironically is Adorno's take on jazz music, which is popular at the time, but also seen as somewhat deviant and rebellious and youthful, whereas now it's probably, your great uncle who is the jazz fan that you know of or something, right? It's not a very like cool, chic, new thing in most circles. I mean, it's still, I think jazz is cool, and if you are interested in people like Miles Davis or John Coltrane, we can talk. I like that stuff. But again, I'm an old white guy, and so like that tells you how not new and hip jazz is in most circles. But at the time, it was seen as primarily an African American thing. It was associated with drugs and with clubbing and stuff, and with the way that young people would spend their time, and a lot of old people were worried about that. And so there are all these different dynamics. But primarily, what Adorno was interested in, I don't want to get too much into him, but I think you definitely should look into him if you're interested. His background, right? He fled Nazi Germany. He was a brilliant thinker from the Frankfurt School, which is a lot to explain. But the Frankfurt School was basically interested in critically thinking about how societies work. So he's obviously seeing propaganda, Nazism, Hitler, and he's thinking about what is America doing, what does it look like right now? And so in the post-war years, jazz became really popular among the youth, as I said. And so he was thinking, okay, so here's this like new cool thing, but how cool and how new is it? And what he said basically was that it has what he called later pseudo individualization, which is a really complex idea or complex word for almost a simple idea, which is it seems unique, but it's not. Pseudo is fake. Individualization is, unique, right? So it's fake uniqueness. And I think you can see how this translates to modern day, and I'd like you to think about that, with all these pop stars that you might, like if you think about the big pop stars in your day, meaning now, I guess, what are they and what do they look like? How do they act? What do they do? What do they perform? And I think what you'll find is they all seem really unique, but once you start to break it down, it's like, oh yeah, that pop star is basically the same as that other pop star, except she has a nose ring, or he has those tattoos, or he has more of a bass sound, but I guess he's the same as that other person I was listening to. You'll realize that there's a sort of standardization in pop music, and that's what Adorno is really getting to, right? And that's how it can translate. That's why it's still an important essay, but it translates to all of these new contexts. You could apply this to Hollywood film. You could apply this to a lot of the television that you might be watching. It all seems new and interesting and unique, but then you take away one little pseudo-individual thing that makes it unique, and then suddenly, yeah, it looks like every other thing. So I have some examples that I want you to check out. I think you'll be surprised maybe about how they work because, yeah, they're so obvious. And if they were unique, why would they be so obvious to us when we look at these videos? As an example, if you were to design your own, and I really want you to spend a minute doing this, if you were to design your own song and pitch it, you don't have to write it like as a musician, I want you to pitch it like as a producer. How would you pitch it? Let's say I had $1 million investment portfolio and I was looking for the next pop song to put my money behind. You can come up with a pop song. If you're more familiar with country, you can come up with a country song. If you're more familiar with hip hop and rap, you can come up with a song that's hip hop and rap, but what would it look like? Explain it to me. I want you to really think about that, and if you want, you can pause it here, but how would you do it? And I think what's more interesting than your actual answer is how easy it is, if you're listening to hip hop or if you're listening to country, to say, oh, if you want a hit country song, this is what you should do, right? You may never have studied music, and you may never have studied cultural studies, and yet you can probably come up with, okay, you definitely need somebody, maybe this person who's the big star right now. I'm not even going to say it because it'll date me, but whoever you're thinking of, you will get them to sing it, and we'll make sure that it features maybe a second person, or it features this musician who's really hot right now, or we should really get whoever to direct it because they've done some cool videos lately. You can probably put this stuff together, and the fact that you can do that means that, yeah, it's probably on one level, I'm sure it's a great idea, but on another level, probably almost anyone else could have come up with that too, right? It points to one of the fundamental issues with culture more generally, and with society more generally, is that it seems like we all want the new cool thing. But in all of us wanting the new cool thing, and in all of us going towards what everyone else sort of is saying is the new cool thing, it really looks like the old not so cool thing, usually with a little tweak, and that's the pseudo individualization, right? So no, this is not the same at all. This has so-and-so doing it, or this is not the same car at all. This has a new kind of power display, or whatever, right? So there's this new thing, but you break that down and it's really the old thing. This happens always. It happens in music, it happens in movies, it happens everywhere, really. So why does this happen? It happens because we tell ourselves we like new things. But in actuality, if you look at what we do, what we invest in, what our standard practices are, what we seem to value, it's always the same stuff over and over again, right? Kids are always going to want young people who are attractive, who are somewhat unique, like maybe they have dyed hair, or they have piercings or something, but something that stands out, and that will always scare older people. And so they'll say, in my day, we didn't have that kind of stuff. And then, you look at them, and yeah, maybe they had the Beatles or Elvis or whatever, but those were young, attractive people who had certain features. Elvis had his certain outfits, the Beatles had their certain haircuts and all these things, right? So it is the same, it's just the actual thing is different, but every time it's the same practice, right? It's somebody who's doing this new thing, and then everybody does that, and then that's the old thing that your grandparents like. You like something totally fresh and different, but that really is the same as before if you start to really break it down. So what does that mean? And what does it mean for art? Does that mean you shouldn't like anything popular? Does that mean that all popular culture is just garbage, as some people think of it? Or maybe it means that you can understand a culture better, like the youth culture of a time, or maybe a region like the West Coast sound or whatever it is, right? You can better understand it through the conventions that they're producing and through their standard deviation and individualization instead of others that went in a different direction, right? One of my favorite examples, when you think about it, is 80s, 90s hip-hop. The East Coast sound, like New York and stuff, had a lot more like treble. And it had a lot more, you can identify that in relation to the West Coast sound, which had a lot more bass. And it's a simple distinction, but when you think about it, it reveals a number of things, particularly, if you think about the East Coast groups that were listening to hip hop, they might have had boom boxes or something, but they definitely were mostly walking around. They were at people's houses, they had small apartments, whatever. Whereas the West Coast, people were driving, right? If you think about LA, everyone drives everywhere. So you can get big bass speakers that you go around with. And then if you want to be like the cool guy which is definitely not the cool guy, and I hope you're not one of these people, but then you have your bass going really loud, right? That works, but only really with cars. It doesn't work so much if you have a little boom box or a small apartment. And so these two sounds kind of changed in different ways based on who was listening, but also what they were listening with. And so they had their individual unique elements, like, oh, that sounds like East Coast, that sounds like West Coast. But also you take that away and a lot of the stuff is very similar, right? There's a lot that we can unpack, but I just want to think about this idea of standardization. Standardization is good in some ways, right? If your car breaks down, you need new wheels, you need a new light or whatever. it's good to have a standard size. It's good to have a standard thing that you can order and replace it with, and you're not going to have to remeasure your light, right? You're not going to have to remeasure your wheel. You can just say it's for an Impala, and this is the year and model, and this is what we need to get, and you can reorder that. So that's great. We tend to think of music as quite the opposite, right? You tend to think of music as a unique expression of the soul, and maybe in some cases it sort of is, but at the same time, at least what Adorno argues is that's also quite standardized, right? You replace this with that, and then you have the new sound, and that will change in this predictable way every year or every few months now, and it works in the same way that we manufacture automobiles. It doesn't seem like that would intuitively make sense, the music industry, and a car manufacturer, but when you think about standardization, they start to look somewhat similar in terms of the industry that makes it. You have the music industry, right? You have the automobile industry. You have a standard set of practices, both sides. You also have some kind of flair, right? This is the new red model, or this model comes with this new Bluetooth device or whatever, right? But you can kind of predict how that's going to go, and you can also kind of predict, like in 10 years, people would be like, oh my God, he has that Bluetooth thing, that's so 10 years ago. And so the same happens with music, right? It's an interesting comparison that's really all I want you to think about. There are quotes we could discuss. Again, I want you to think about if you were to design a music video or a music song, this new single in your favorite genre, what do you kind of already know that allows you to do that? And then how does that work in terms of what you listen to being new versus what you listen to being somewhat standardized? I mean, if you went up to people, or maybe you're on a date describing your taste, right? I don't think anyone would ever say like, oh, I have a standardized taste in music. And yet maybe we sort of do, we just don't want to say it, because then, how is it that we can just click a few buttons, I like this genre, I am this old, and so YouTube just gives you what you want to listen to, and it can pretty easily predict it, right? Sometimes. It's disturbing to think that we might listen to, I'm not saying you need to agree with this, but I want you to think through Adorno's argument. We might be doing this, and if we're doing this, if we're treating sort of music like cars, then there's these industries that are telling us and kind of producing our likes and dislikes. And if that's happening, then we get to this idea like it's supposed to be this unique expression of ourselves and our taste, right? But maybe we're falling in line with this, and maybe that seems like this American capitalist free market youth culture, whatever, is not so different from the fascist market of ideas that we're kind of telling people, let's all do this and we must all agree with this. You would think that they're the complete opposite, but again, what Adorno says is maybe they're not. I mean, Rupert gets very excited during this talk, and so he's barking a little bit, you can tell. But anyway, it's kind of discomforting, but it's also really thought-provoking and interesting to think about how that connects, and how, this idea like pop music could work in a very similar way to Nazi propaganda, at least, through the manufacturing, through industry of ideas that then we think that we have chosen uniquely, but somehow we're all at the concert singing the same lines with each other. Food for thought. So I hope you get a lot out of this reading. I think, again, on the surface, you might think like, I don't know who this old German guy is, and I don't know any of these songs he's talking about. That's not what's important, at least not to me. What's important is we start to think about these bigger implications. So enjoy it. I look forward to seeing your responses to this week's questions, and take care.